Welcome to Beyond the Screen, an IONOS podcast, where we share insights and tips to help you scale your business's online presence, hosting genuine conversations with the best in the web and IT industry, and exploring how the IONOS brand can help professionals and customers with their hosting and cloud issues. We're your hosts, Joe Nash and Liz Moy. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Screen, an IONOS podcast. Today, we're joined by Evangelos Pappas, who brings with him over 14 years of experience in IT startups, software development, and delivering B2B platform software. He has a rich history in leading and delivering solutions for tech IP for numerous companies, making significant contributions in ad tech, energy, and data analytics industries. Evangelos is currently the head of technology at IndiGG, a revolutionary organization aiming to create the world's largest web-free gaming DAO. Simultaneously, he's also the founder and CEO of Ocean, an enterprise working towards providing an end-to-end cloud operating system for enterprise blockchains. And if that isn't impressive enough, he has his own venture, Evangelos Labs, that focuses on developing scalable web platforms and messaging backends. As someone who's been on the front lines of technological innovation, his insights in how cloud data should evolve for the new wave of AI will be invaluable. Evangelos, welcome to the show.
Hey, Joe. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's kick off, because we went through a whole bunch of things on the intro. I love it when we get guests with big, beefy intros, lots of things going on, because it leads me to ask you, your career spans lots of roles currently and also in the past. That's a lot of balls you're juggling, from head of technology IndiGG through to running your own company. What is your journey and what drove you towards this particular sector that you're at now?
Yeah, definitely. So I joined the IndiGG and we're helping the IndiGG to scale after they acquired pretty much Metanomic, which was the startup that I was the CTO with. And the whole vision is at IndiGG is to create the largest Web3 gaming DAO, at least in India or globally, and globally with the aspiration of global. And based in pretty much when you want to do things like that, data becomes your primary focus on how you want to cohort your users, target them, understand, serve the right content to them. And so I would say the whole core of everything is, at the end of the day, data, to be honest. Yeah, that's pretty much what drives everything. Yeah,
interesting. And you've worked in a lot of industries where, as you said, data is the core there, from ad tech, data analytics, gaming. What are some of the key moments or decisions that have shaped how you think about and handle that data?
That's actually a good question. As always, with all the technical answers, it depends, right?
Sure.
That data is pretty much nothing but numbers, right? Mm-hmm. And every time you're trying to give a meaning to the numbers that you have received. Right. So the answer is, what is the meaning that you are looking for on every time on your use case, right? Mm-hmm. So you might receive the same data, and if you are a gaming company, you might want to understand why does your user spend 10 minutes on level 1 and 13 minutes on level 2, for example. But if you receive the same data and you are a brand or an advertising company, you want to see, based on the same data, you would say, on level 2, I have 3 more minutes of attention. So what can I do with those three more minutes? So data, as I said, is always about perspective. And this is something that we try to do at Metanomic before is that we try to shift the perspective of how we create some behavioral profiles of the users, right? So not just pretty much create cohorts as pretty much usually happens on the ad tech space of what people usually like in terms of commercial, but what do people tend to do in terms of behaviors, right? So for example, does a user usually play at night and they usually achieve more things at night instead of them playing in the morning? And if that's the case, maybe that's a user that probably likes to potentially buy more Red Bulls rather than, for example. So that's pretty much a lesson that I learned from data, is that, you might be receiving the same data, but your perspective always depends on your use case. Yeah.
Very interesting. I guess part of what you're talking about, part of the use case of that data there, I guess, is one that's very topical at the moment, which is the use of data for developing various automated algorithms or AI algorithms. How do you think the current cloud landscape supports preparing and handling data towards building out those products and actually managing to create those created experiences?
Yeah, actually, at the moment, we are, I think, in a definitely pivotal moment for AI. So far, we have been delivering automation on data in the shape and forms of machine learning algorithms, which is pretty much an automation on machine learning solutions, pretty much automate how you aggregate your data or how you cohort your data or how you do, very specific predictions and things like that. But now we are in a moment of not just doing pretty much statistical analysis on what you're receiving, but doing something intelligent. And what does intelligence means? Intelligence means something that a person, you would hire a person pretty much to give you this answer. Okay, so pretty much you would hire a person to receive pretty much do a Google search and pretty much give you more context about an answer that you have. So, for example, there's a peak in your traffic, and you can definitely see that as a statistical analysis. But why there's a peak in your traffic, and AI will tell you today it's a peak on your traffic because there's an event happening.
It's the interpretation of the data as well, right? Yeah.
Exactly right. So this is pretty much the next step, I would say, in terms of in terms of solutions, and in terms of like how people are handling this data at the moment. We are quite mature in being able to do the first level of what I described, like statistical analysis and being able to get easy answers from the data that we are capturing. But the next step that we will see as a trend is pretty much the latter, right? Like, how do you use your data to receive more intelligent answers to your use case?
Yeah, for sure. And I imagine the cloud and the access to the compute that you need is a big driving factor in your capabilities and to what extent you're able to achieve this intelligence. How are you finding the current landscape is defining or supporting like where you want to take those products?
Yeah, actually, currently, I would say this is the primary challenge on any work that you need to do with data. Cloud is actually the number one question, right? The main reason is that in order to do any kind of these cool solutions, you have to do them where your data reside, right? Where are they physically? Okay, and because obviously you cannot easily have your interpretation algorithms in one cloud or in one place and have your petabytes of data in another. We just don't have internet. Like the internet is not.
Just give me 1 minute while I transfer a petabyte of data between two cloud providers. That's
exactly.
Not a thing.
Or probably a day.
Yeah.
So pretty much there's a lot of vendor law or a vendor fear, I would say, about listen. If I upload my petabytes of data in this cloud provider, probably I'm quite stuck. Not because of the technology, but because I have such a large commodity that if, for example, I don't know, Azure buys have in 5 years from now better AI and AWS doesn't, or Google or whoever has a better product, you're going to start with a less capable solution while I have the right data to have achieved something better. So this is literally a fear that all the chief technology data or information officers currently have.
It's fascinating that it's also such a, obviously when you're dealing with data that large, the storage of it is in itself so inordinately complex, but it's really interesting just to think of, as you said, those years down the line, your capabilities being defined by the simple decision of where am I parking this data. That's such a simple, relatively requirement compared to the processing of it, but it's such like a pivotal decision. Very interesting. So in terms of the current cloud landscape and the capabilities we mentioned towards the future and always thinking about what would the capabilities of my platform be in the future, what are some of those trends that, people who are making these decisions today, like what should they be thinking about for their future providers as they're making those calls today?
Yeah, absolutely. Pricing, always, like when it comes to cloud, I would say always pricing is definitely the number one, right? Because when you'll be in front of your stakeholders meeting and you're going to say that we chose this X provider, well, it's going to cost us 3 times more than an alternative, you better have a good excuse why. So price is always the number one. Secondly is, as I said, does this cloud provider has a good record on meeting the needs of the industry that you want to, of your industry, right? And the keyword here is in your industry, because we do see different providers being able to have, although for example, AWS, obviously the larger market size, in the cloud, there are very, very much niche solutions that thrive better in different industries, for example.
And also these different industries have different regulatory environments.
Exactly. Exactly, right? The third thing, very spot on, is actually regulation, right? And last thing is geolocation, right? Like we in the West, we are quite well put, pretty much like we have quite well support in terms of data centers from pretty much every provider out there. But if you look at the data centers that exist in Africa, for example, or or in Asia, or Oceania, they're one I don't know, light years. So this will have an impact both on your data transfer, right? You obviously won't be able to transfer petabytes between your India to German data centers, no physical means, right? And because of regulation, you won't be able to as well. But thirdly, what are your users? Your users would definitely see a glitch of 50 milliseconds if your data are being served from Germany rather than their local Indian data center, for example. So I would say these are the 3-4 main factors of choosing the right provider.
And I imagine topics like latency especially important because that's, especially for your industry, that's very gameplay limiting if you're going to have that any kind of latency. Which brings me on to, I guess, a bit of a pivot to how IndiGG are tackling these topics. So we've heard a bit about the concept of a data mesh that is being played with at IndiGG. Can you tell us a little bit about this and how it's being used and what it's been developed for?
Yeah. So this is pretty much my vision, pretty much. So in terms of data mesh, so this is a relatively new architecture latest archetype in the data world, right? So previously, for example, if you look at the history of how data have been managed so far in any industry, is that previously we had large databases that they were just this kind of monolith databases, but eventually with a better data governance and a better management, we started calling them warehouses, and these warehouses became part from the internal data centers to the cloud. And then with the latest trends of the cloud providers, we started pretty much evolving that into the notion of data lakes. So what happens with the data lakes is that the problem that we have with the data warehouses is that in order to store something, you already have to have a very, very strict governance of your entities, a very strict governance of your quality. And if something just wasn't fitting there as a Lego, it was just crumbling the whole application. And that wasn't very particularly applicable when it was coming to large data or analytical data, because what the last decade gave us is that you need to capture as much data as possible and then find out what you want to do.
And sometimes that's ad hoc and you don't know the current usage.
Exactly. So this gave birth to the data lakes, right? So we started pretty much creating large and large data lakes to the point that also the data lakes became unmanageable because we started collecting so much data, and it was cataloging this data became like this unmanageable thing, right? Okay, so we have all these data points now and they're unstructured. What do we do with them?
Go to the extreme opposite problem where the warehouse is too much structure and the lake is just like a complete unstructured.
Exactly, right? So a data mesh is pretty much the kind of evolution of those two, or the merger, I would say. So instead of creating pretty much just monoliths of these two worlds, why don't you create pretty much kind of mini lakes and warehouses per domain of your department and department? Again, it varies depending on your business and industries and everything. For example, you are collecting data from the Web3, you are collecting data from games, you are collecting data from the commerce or your e-shop. Right? So why don't you localize this collection and this indexing, and then create a catalog that is correctly routing these requests pretty much. Right. So for example, you want to create a new application that is fetching gamers depending on what they have bought, right? So instead of having a large database of having all this information there, get part of the information from this department, which has its own kind of database, and the other information from the other database system, and then serve this as an information. So this is the data mesh, right? It's having distributed your governance into more manageable mini pod, and then have a routing solution to serve it. It's a bit more. It does require a bit more maturity into your data team, but it gives way more flexibility. So this is the idea behind the data mesh, is that it creates a much better flexibility to grow when you have multiple domains as an industry to manage.
Fascinating. And I guess to follow that through, that flexibility and that ability to gather data from those various domains, how's that influencing your AI strategy?
So AI is pretty much this hungry kid that wants to know more and just wants to eat more.
Absorb all data.
Exactly, right? Like it's this beast kid that really just wants something more. So before you feed this kid, you need to cook, right? And this whole data strategy and data governance is about cooking the right food. So AI is pretty much something that I'm personally growing. To be honest, we haven't been managed to completely scale it at the moment, but the idea is as we said, right? So collecting the data is the step one. Step two is making the right statistical models for you to understand what you have. And then once you start understanding, and what does understanding mean? Means that you can use your data to start answering simple questions. What are my current users? What is the trajectory? What are the cohorts, right? And things like that. then you are in the right maturity to go on the next step and say, listen, let's take the current cohort and ask something more, right? Let's take the cohort of the gamers that usually play at night and create some blog posts for them, right? Based on the activity that we see on our system, right? So this could be something that you could do with the latest AI trends. You could use the ChatGPT,
just feed it straight to an LLM.
Yeah, exactly. API and say, listen, I'm having this kind of users, this kind of behavior. What kind of blog posts you be able to create to fit this specific persona of my users. So so AI is pretty much the next step of the maturity of your team. And it's pretty much it. It's exciting next bit.
Interesting. To change gears a little bit, we've been talking about AI, we've been talking, and obviously we spoke about your current role and it being into DAOs, this kind of thing. So you're astride these two big moments in the tech industry, the current AI hype and the I guess slightly previous but still very contemporary blockchain and Web3. How have you found the integration of those two things, and how has that affected your data management?
So these are two technologies that they don't have to be interlinked, but you can do great things together, right? So blockchain pretty much it's a network of interactions, right? So it's the way that you connect either people or computers or organizations together, right? So this is what blockchain answers. Now, why do you connect them? It's pretty much a data problem, right? And so for example, you want to create a new smart contract. And if this smart contract is just doing things that are just happening on the blockchain, you don't have a data problem. But if that smart contract needs to do something that is related to the outside world, then you have a data problem, right? Because you need to understand first the outside world and then send the right signal to this smart contract. So there are solutions that you can do whereby you're understanding the world outside with your machine learning models, and then you are interacting with your smart contracts in the architecture pattern that we call Oracle, for example. So you can create an Oracle which is understanding, it's interacting with the outside world, and then is passing the right message to your smart contract, and the smart contract pretty much reacts on it. Or you can pretty much reverse the tables and use blockchain as the network of your data points, the source of your data points, and see, hey, you know what, my users are interacting with me, but they're also interacting with other games. What do they do with those other games? What do they tend to like? And can I offer something that from my platform that they also have from outside world? So for example, I can see people are playing Axie Infinity. Maybe they like some other kind of RPG games or NFT heavy kind of games. So you can drive recommendation engine. You can feed the recommendation engines based on other blockchain interactions that you see in the network. So these are the kind of archetypes that you can marry those two worlds. But there are many interesting ideas that I see popping up. To be honest, people trying to decentralize AI and things like that using blockchain. I don't have a specific project in my mind at the moment, but it's literally one of those things that you read about every. I remain hopeful that something quite cool will come up. But I would say decentralizing AI, whereby blockchain plays a pivotal role. I think we're very early days there. So I would say the marriage between the blockchain world and AI is for the first two use cases that I said.
I don't want to dwell on that too much, but now I'm intrigued. From my limited understanding of both worlds, what would it be? What data are they talking about putting on the blockchain in that case? So are we talking the model parameters? Are we talking the original training set? What is it that lives on the blockchain in that case?
Again, as I said,
all of the above.
It depends, right? So for example, I don't know, let's just, you said you're also technical, right? So let's try to brainstorm, right? What if you had a prompt whereby this prompt was set in a smart contract, and if you were to change it, you'd have to have a set of people to vote on it, vote on the change, and everyone would be sharing an open prompt that is defined on the smart contract.
Would that idea work? So one of the issues we've now completely changed topic of this podcast. Welcome to the AI Future podcast. So one of the issues that's been affecting, for example, the current ChatGPT LM thing is people using a version of the OpenAI API from a month ago with a particular prompt, and then they update it ephemerally behind the scenes, and now that prompt no longer produces the result that it did. With this kind of putting a prompt on a blockchain, could that work both ways? Where if I know that I've got my prompt on a blockchain at this point in time, that equally I expect the output shouldn't change for that prompt.
So this would definitely work on the open source model. So for example, if you you're using Falcon, for example, as your AI model,
Right.
this would definitely work, and this would definitely create some great ideas. The specific problem with OpenAI is that they're not openly versioning the updates of the GPT. So this is why people are complaining about the drift of its performance.
And for Midjourney as well is also the issue.
Yeah, exactly. They're not openly versioning it for their own reasons.
Yeah.
So I definitely think that someone will challenge that. Recently, we saw Anthropic pretty much coming up with their own very great competitor, Claude 2 model, right?
Yeah.
So Anthropic has a great chance here to actually challenge the openness of OpenAI and pretty much give us a better versioning, right?
Yeah.
But as of now, what you said is definitely achievable with open source. And I think actually open source models definitely have a competitive edge over the closed source providers because of that. Yeah.
I guess it's I guess it's not surprising given that a lot of the talk about generative models over the last couple of years has been the fact that they're a black box. But it is interesting that it seems that reproducibility is going to become a competitive edge in the short-term future. That's not, everyone's always thinking of them in terms of escalating reasoning abilities or intelligence abilities, their ability to do surprising things. That's not just generate text, but it's actually just getting it to do the same thing twice seems like the dominant real world use case challenge.
Exactly.
Yeah. We've been talking about ways of gathering lots of data and using lots of data. Obviously, privacy is a huge issue in this, and there are techniques for managing use of privacy in terms of your data collection, but also in terms of training and using AIs. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about the importance of privacy preserving when it comes to using things like AI and machine learning and how you're managing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, it depends. At the moment, to be honest, these are two diverging worlds that at the moment they rarely have a common point. Very few people are speaking of a privacy first AI, and actually the blockchain world is tending to be privacy first, right? To be honest, the next steps of the blockchain protocols actually might even prohibit the use case that I mentioned before, which is for you to be able to have an open access to all these data points that you can infer from the users. So these are definitely two competing worlds that we're speaking about. This is definitely an unanswered question. Definitely there are startups that are trying to answer this, and it's definitely, I would say, maybe the next billion startup that if someone managed to nail it, and they would definitely worth it for someone to tackle this kind of issue, because it's an actual issue, right? Because at the moment, if you want to use users' personal data in your prompt, unfortunately, you have to pass this information.
It has to be consumed.
And you have to pass it to open. For example, if you're
it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And again, maybe the answer is again on the open source models, because you can achieve better privacy or better control privacy.
Standard, if you're running the model yourself, you know exactly what's happening, kind of situation.
Exactly. So maybe the answer is on the open source models, right? But this is literally the next phase. So far, you have been having GDPR because currently the data flows were much better managed by the engineers, right? Because engineers, we like to be more certain about things that are happening, right? We are control freaks, right? But now AI is challenging that, right? It's giving randomness to our to our flows, and literally achieving privacy on while you are not certain what's happening there. I would say it's if someone is listening and they want to have the next billion startups, that's literally the topic.
This is another surprising vertical element of the whole thing, that there's so much has been said and spoken about users' data collection over the years, and the data privacy issue that's really the straw that broke the camel's back for generative AI is not the data in the training sets or any of that came from. It's the fact that company employees are putting IP into these chat boxes, right? It's such and also the fact that's not unusual. All of these companies are using, their employees are signing up for 20 cloud services a week. We're all going and signing up for the next smart to-do list app and putting all their company's plans in it, right? And it's only now with AI that suddenly we want to be careful which SaaS services we put our company's data in. It's very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. This will definitely be the question. Once people start having the maturity and understanding that this is exactly the right questions that we should be asking. This is literally the demand that will be created now and for the next 3 years.
So you mentioned open source a couple of times, and I guess a brief step from there, from open source to open standards. So obviously one of the things we've seen with all the AI conversation and the new open source LLMs coming out is also talk about standards for the data. How do we transfer this data? How do we keep the training set data in common formats? Have you seen any interesting movement there? Are there any standards for managing the data that we give to AIs that that you find useful or helpful in your work?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Not really.
Okay.
So I'm just thinking, like in terms of like training your AI in a standard way. So it will depend on the kind of embeddings that we are using, right? At the moment, like speaking for LLM applications mainly, right? So depending on your use case, depending on the content that you want to train your model with, and depending what you want to base with, I would say that the first depending factor, it will be in which based embeddings you'll use, and this will pretty much drive your next factor. Yeah, I don't think I know something about that or have seen something. So yeah. You're asking all the right questions, Joe.
That's what we like to hear on this show. We like to hear that we're asking the right questions. Cool. We are coming towards the end of our times. I guess I want to wrap up on asking you. We like to tap our very experienced guests for the juicy nuggets that we can apply to our own work and other businesses. From your perspective, what do you think would be the single most important piece of advice for businesses aiming to optimize their data on the cloud for AI?
To optimize the data, well, first of all, as we said, right, AI is the final frontier of your data, and you have to have the maturity before you reach there. And although many are there, also a lot are not, right? Many things they are, but they aren't.
Sure.
How do you have your data in such a way that you can easily feed it into a prompt?
That's a good one.
Yeah, do you understand your data, right? Have you asked the simple questions before you go to the more complicated ones, right? And do you need to? Like, maybe you don't need to, right? But and the next step is that you need to understand what is your competitive edge on the data that you are already having. Maybe you don't need to use your data. Maybe there is something already out there that is providing already a model that is more or less what you're expecting. So, for example, if you're an ESOP and maybe you haven't been so good in collecting data, maybe it doesn't worth spending millions in now building a data structure. Maybe there are already open source e-commerce models, even on Kaggle, for example, that provide some data points open source that you can use this to train to provide a basic training to your model, so you can start from there as a checkpoint, continue, right? So I would say these are, it always depends. These are not straightforward answers, I would say.
Yeah, but, we like it depends as an answer here. The interesting things are going to come when you start when it depends. So we like to hear that. Perfect. That's awesome. Super. Thank you so much for joining me today. We definitely covered a lot of ground. So thank you for joining us on the show, Evangelos.
That was interesting. Thank you as well.
Beyond the Screen, an IONOS podcast. To find out more about IONOS and how we're the go-to source for cutting-edge solutions in web development, visit ionos.com and then make sure to search for IONOS in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at IONOS, thanks for listening.